Welcome back to our debate about European unification, the focus on enlargement, and now about the Euro enlargement that I call Euro 34. You can also follow that on Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Facebook. I do these campaigns all over social media and also on my website. But please, the focus here, I will now explain exactly why in this current crisis it's so important for Eastern Europe to be in the Eurozone, for the countries who are already in the European Union, and for the countries who are on the way to the European Union or want in the future to apply. That's EU 37, including Ukraine and the Balkans, Moldova, Georgia, 9 new countries, and then for them to adopt the Euro unilateral as Montenegro and Kosovo have done so successfully. And this I will now debate. I call this the new Werner Plan. Werner, of course, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, who in 1969 and 70 has proposed the currency union. Then came the terrible 70s. It took a long time. Now, luckily, we have this euro, and it's such a wonderful tool to stay united and not to have competitive devaluations, complete crisis. Imagine one moment how the world would look, Europe would look, if in 2008 and now in 2020 we wouldn't have the euro. A lot of devaluations would certainly occur, and there would be deep chaos in the European currency system without the euro. And basically, ideologically, also to explain a continental union needs a continental currency. And that's very important for fairness, for transparency, for the market forces to really work. And that's really very important. We have some outliers on the periphery of Europe who have not decided to join. Also, Sweden, also Denmark should join. Also, one day the United Kingdom, if it ever returns, to adopt the euro before. But my focus, obviously, is now the 9 countries, so the countries who have not joined the eurozone up to now for various reasons, and also Ukraine and Georgia, Moldova, and the 4 Balkan countries which still don't have the euros and the euro, but they should also join and adopt the euro before, immediately. Just to make it very clear, we're not talking about the long-term project, we're talking about this term. Until 2024, all these countries should be in the eurozone or adopting the euro. So I have made the whole list here, also I think quite transparent. Here it's basically the first one, of course, Poland. That's very important. The Polish complained that the Germans make this Nord Stream 2. Here's the deal. Cut Nord Stream 2, Germany. Poland joined the Eurozone. We could all do with a little bit more unity in the European Union, couldn't we? So would it not be much nicer if Poland joins the Eurozone? That would really impress Putin. That would lead also Ukraine to the conclusion to adopt the euro. That would also show the world that Poland is a pro-European country. And it would be also the argument to say finally to the friends in Germany, please don't circumvent Eastern Europe energetically and do your separate Russian gas deal. So both a little bit more European, not blaming each other for wrongdoings, but doing the things which are necessary and which are right. The same is also here the question of Romania. We have now to celebrate also, we have already to celebrate Croatia and Bulgaria being almost in the euro. Of course, the EU then waits for another 2 years. It's totally ununderstandable why this is happening. Bulgaria is already packed 20 years, but now they have to wait another 2 years for issuing the euro. Why is that? I have no simple understanding. I don't know. But obviously also the big crisis now in Europe about the budget, because Poland is blocking then the budget, Hungary threatening the same. On the rule of law, it's very difficult to justify cutting the budget. But on not joining the Eurozone, it's very simple to justify not to disperse more transfers. Why? Because if you are too rich for the best tool of convergence which we have, that's the euro, because the euro enhances and accelerates the convergence of prosperity in the European Union. Your people in Poland and in Hungary get rich faster. So if you don't need that, so we don't need to send you so much money then. It's so logically. But not the rule of law, which is very complicated. It's difficult to prove, it's difficult to justify. Everybody feels very much, in the right, in the correct, and we have a complete mess. Yeah? So Poland, Czech Republic adopt the Euro and not adopt, but join the Eurozone immediately. And then we have much more unity. It will be serving the interests of all Europeans, especially the ones who are afraid of Russia, because this will really impress Putin very much. Here comes Romania. Another issue, we are totally delaying Romania. Now we have a good government there. Why are we keeping Romania still in a second level membership? Yeah? It's not in the same line now with Bulgaria and Croatia. That's wrong. And also OECD, CVM, all this mechanism, we have not really accepted Romania as a full member, seems to me. And the Romanians are not pushing hard enough for Eurozone membership, whenever it's a very important country. It has more population than the Balkan 6 now. This is really a big economic power. It would change the currency reality also of Eastern Europe if Romania now decides to join the Eurozone, and it should, and we should accept it very fast. Then the whole situation looks much different. It is very important for Moldova. It's very important for also for Hungary, surrounded completely then by Eurozone members. Yeah? I mean, that will be probably the only way to convince Orban in that way. Obviously, this would be the Eurozone members, and then the adopters. We have, first of all, the easy cases like Bosnia and Macedonia. They are already pegged to the Euro since basically 20 years, yeah, and maybe the longer, before to the mark. And this is very simple for them. Actually, it's the same case like with Bulgaria. Just allow them to issue the euro. That's it, basically. And once they are then member of the European Union, hopefully fast, and obviously it's a big symbolic step to be closer to Europe when you are using the euro already, and then to also join the Eurozone. It's more complicated with Albania, but not so much complicated. They have managed to stabilize the currency more or less now for the last 15 years and 10 years, and since the financial crisis. And it's basically a very pro-European country. Everything is okay, and they have an issue still with corruption. But adopting the euro obviously is a major step towards reducing corruption in a country. You have seen that in Montenegro, but in other countries as well, because the big problematic issues of the financial system is then much more transparent, and also you should adopt the European banking regulation and so on and so on. So the big step, obviously, it's Ukraine, and that's a very big country. But I have made the case already. It's 130 billion of additional GDP. That's the Ukrainian output. It's not so much when you compare it with a EU of 18 trillion or a Eurozone of 14 trillion. So the 130 billion of Ukraine really. And all in all, when you look, it's 260 billion, which all the Balkan and the three Eastern Partnership countries, these 9 countries, bring on the weight. It's not so much. And so it will not, in its sense, be any risk, because some people say, oh, Günther, you bring all these countries, will be a big risk for the Eurozone, very terrible. No, it will not be a big risk, because simply the output level, the monetary volume is not so big. It's not a lot of risk. It brings a lot of opportunities, because it's a lot of people, it's 67 million people, which additionally then in the Euro payment area, in the Euro using area, in the Euro adoption area, and that's of course a big step forward towards joining the internal market, the European Union. And, as I've put it here, everybody in Brussels and Frankfurt seems to be very much about the global role. This is, of course, all these people who want to compete with America and the dollar and somehow think that Europe is the counter-American project. They are totally wrong. And I've made many presentations about that one already. But what we really should make is to make sure that our euro is able and useful in the fragile area on the border to Russia. And then, we are useful in the global currency mix. Yeah? And then we can also help in other areas. Very good, but let's not go into the megalomaniac grandstanding and competing with the dollar. Let's be a useful pillar of European prosperity, for all Europeans first, and then, being a part of a global Western financial system and a global economic system which is useful, and not to have dreams of replacing the dollars in the Iran business and all these things which never work and create only bad blood. So we come here to Serbia. This is, of course, very important as part of the peace deal. The Serbs also have to commit to the Western institutions in some ways. If they don't want to immediately join NATO, which anyhow they will have to before they join the EU, that's absolutely sure, at least adopt the euro, so you are in the euro system and you can show the population some concrete result. That can be a very good tool as part of a peace agreement with Kosovo, mutual recognition, and the euro for the Serbs. Then Moldova and Georgia, obviously, also they want to very much join the European Union. They are very advanced in many aspects already, and they are the victims of Euro rejectionism and this closing and this called enlargement fatigue. And we have really, I want to apologize in the name of all Europeans, how badly the European Union has treated Moldova and also Georgia in the last 12 years. That's really outrageous. They are great reformers, especially Georgia is an amazing reformer, especially Moldova already in CEFTA, already in ASEAN and the Regional Cooperation Council, and we have still not allowed them to adopt the euro, and so they are falling behind towards the European Union, because that is basically the truth about all these countries. They will fall behind because in the crisis, capital will fly into the Eurozone, into the safety, and they will get less foreign direct investments. They will have more fragility. They will have to have higher interest rates in order to stabilize their currency, which is already the case in Ukraine and in Georgia. And there is a lot of negative risk attached from any aspect if they are not adopting the euro. So that is actually very important and very urgent. I have said already it's late for Romania, and it's good that we celebrate now Croatia and Bulgaria. There was some courage and leadership to get Croatia in, that was very good, but we are really late on Romania. And why does it take 2 years, 3 years now for the Croatians and the Bulgarians to issue the coins and the bills? Yeah? I mean, electronic payment, we are in the 21st century, we are not fools. Yeah? We can do that in 3 months if we want. Yeah? And I have no understanding for these delays. I have no patience anymore for these delays. I cannot understand what is wrong in Frankfurt and in Brussels and Berlin. Always to do this discriminatory policy towards Bulgaria, Croatia and Romania as EU members, it's outrageous. Anyhow, let me come back to the facts. Yeah? Let's not get too excited. Eurozone enlargement. I have made it very clear that it's a problem that since Lithuania, no single new member has joined the Eurozone. Yeah? I don't know what happened in the last 6 years. Yeah? Okay, we had, of course, the crisis with Russia. I understand that. It's a big crisis. Yeah? Hostile Russia, the Ukrainian war, yes, it is a big problem. But I think we really should be more united. Russia will win this confrontation ideologically and technically if we are not more united. And when we are paralyzed just because of Russia making war against us in Ukraine and Georgia, Syria and Libya, and then we are not able to bring new countries into the euro, our institutions work. Let's nobody stop them. If you have lost the courage to really enlarge them, please, then we don't have the appropriate personality in the institutional framework. Yeah? Please, 6 years of a freeze is enough. Get Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania in. And as I have said already, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, it's absolutely the condition to adopt to join the Eurozone. And this is really what you should do. If you have any reasons not to do, because you like currency manipulation, Mr. Orban, if you want to do your egocentric stuff in Czech Republic, if you think that this is the best economic way, see the facts. It's not true. Slovakia is the one of the 4 Visegrad countries which has adopted and joined the Eurozone, and it's much richer now than Poland. And of course, and Hungary. And of course, Czech Republic, is still ahead. Yeah? But it's by far the most developed part of Europe. It was historically always the richest part of Europe, Bohemia. You cannot compare it with mainly agriculture and poor Slovakia. But this has changed. This has dramatically changed because of better policy and Eurozone membership. Please, it's a fact. Huh? Ask your experts. So, when you don't want to join the euro, you are too rich for subsidies. It's quite logically, please then send the money back Poland, send the money back Hungary, send the money back Czech Republic, yeah? Or join the Eurozone. I have made all these beautiful contributions to the EU budget. The blue is ones that receive the most. And you see that Hungary and Poland and Czech Republic are massively receiving. They even receive more than Slovakia. I mean, it's outrageous because Slovakia is so successful, yeah? And you guys who are sitting on the throttle of EU subsidies then reject the euro and make jokes about it just, because you fancy all these manipulative and corruptive and collusive opportunities which your own currency gives to the elite who controls the central bank? Outrageous. So it comes here. We have to also be, and here the Europeans are to blame because we reject the Romanians, we delay the Romanians in OECD, we insist on CVM, we reject them from Schengen and also from the Eurozone. Romania is a wonderful country, it's big economic success. Okay, it was governed by a very collusive, corrupt socialist troop for some years now, but now the good guys are in power again. So now let's lock the situation in. Do you want to have really a situation in some years just because we were all delaying and then the socialists will be back and still Romania is not in the euro, in Schengen, in OECD? I mean, that would be a terrible self-inflicted defeat. And all the real criteria, because Dombrovskis is very famous for inventing more criteria, even more complicated criteria. Yeah? But the real interesting criteria, and this was always the most important, is the debt to GDP. Who in Europe has just 35%? Probably now in Corona they have much more, but certainly they are below the Maastricht criteria, and that's important. And look at the GDP numbers. They are behind Slovakia still, but they are 12,000. It's not bad. So really, let's get Romania in, and this is already very important. So I say also Euroization, that's the word, Euro adoption, there's different words you can use, but what I say is important to get the 4 Balkan countries into the Euro adopting area. They will not sit in Frankfurt with a stylish new board member. They will not have the same influence in the banking system, not the same mechanism. It's a bit of a harder way. It's a bit of a crashing gate way, but that's the only way that is open. And it's a very powerful way because you show your population that the future is Europe. You show your population that investment is safe, that they are connected with the European Union by the euro. And it is not true that everything gets more expensive. It's a completely nonsense. It's getting more competitive, so the price level is more comparable and there is less of devaluation, less inflation, and also the price and the wage levels are corresponding. So the whole idea of Eurozone is more expensive is compared, when you have constant devaluation where the salaries and the price levels totally glide downwards, yeah, and you compensate it with high inflation and situation, then of course, the perception might be when you then move from Albania to Kosovo that everything is more expensive because the people are getting richer there as well and better paid. So really, get me not started on this whole euro is a problem thing. So what we really need is to adopt, first to back the currencies which are not backed. That's Serbia, that's Albania, that's Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova. But also others should back. I'm always advocating also for Turkey and for the Azerbaijanis and the Armenians, because what you see is major currency declines. I think I have the slide coming up here. Yes, I will show you in a second. That is basically the idea here, that we have the currency back to the euros. We also have for 15 countries in Africa packed. All in all, it's over 60 countries which are connected, fixed, linked, packed is the word, with the euro, and it was just celebrated by the EU itself. That's the EU graph for the celebration of the euro success, yeah, for 20 years, yeah. So let's be a little bit courageous and let's get going and not sleep. Devaluations is the classical way to stay poor. This is in some economic theory, I understand, you have a crisis of payment and then you devaluate, I know that theory very well, but it doesn't really apply in the countries close to a big currency zone, yeah, which is mainly connected to that currency zone where most economic interactions are with that currency zone, yeah, because then you create a lot of poverty ultimately. This was the same logic why the Greeks shouldn't have dropped out of the euro, but it's the same logic why most of the countries in close to the Eastern Europe, to the eurozone, have been packed already, and they were much more successful. So of course you can do it in the case of Poland with a very big domestic economy. Yeah. Okay, I understand that argument as well, but for the smaller countries, it's really absolutely way to disaster. And you see the comparison, which I think most striking, is between Kosovo and Georgia. Obviously, Georgia has done much more to reform and to be doing business and anti-corruption, major successes. But in GDP per capita in dollar, it's still on the same level like Kosovo, which 20 years ago was totally destroyed and is now at such an output level. And that's basically because from the start they have basically opted to the mark and then towards the euro. Then let me come to the topic of currency patriotism. That's of course, very big. I received this feedback on my YouTube videos. The Serbs will always have the dinner, forget the euro, and it's a lot of emotions, yeah. But it's like a totally wrong to connect your patriotism towards the paper money. I mean, that's anyhow, when you don't do that in the European Union and you want to join the European Union, that's the euro as well. So it's anyhow not going to stay. So disconnect that patriotism, please, when you want to join from the European Union, which I propose only for the euro future, the countries with a euro future to adopt the euro. But it's totally ridiculous to connect your patriotism with shillings or marks. Yeah, if you feel like that, don't join. It's very bad economic politics to have this high inflation, high risk currencies, and the smart countries they have adopted. Yeah, especially the smaller ones. Here's the best case: Montenegro. They were doing on the 6th of November 1999, the Serbs have lost the Kosovo war and they wanted to separate and they adopted the German mark. This was good. I always put these funny dinars always with the 2 billion or 2 million bills. I have others with a higher denomination. And that was the worst currency in the world, yeah? This dinar. Here is the best one. Here's the 5 billion dinar bill. Anyhow, Euroization of Montenegro then in the year 2002, because first they had the mark and then they adopted the euro after the euro coins were there. The Austrian National Bank helped them. They brought the euros, and so this was a big success. And I hope that it will be repeated and is a role model. The same was done in Kosovo. In Kosovo, people have already used the mark by themselves, basically, because of the high diaspora remittances and support for the independence struggle in Germany. And that was, of course, in mark. So that was already the second currency. And then it was adopted, the euro, in the transfer was happening on the 9th of March 2002. So that was really perfect for Kosovo, a decision with good leadership and with, you see the contrast with the Serbian devaluations. They didn't go there because they were never intrinsically pro-Western up to now. Hopefully they will be. And then they have started with this dinar at about 60. That's, by the way, the same the Macedonian dinar still is today. And now they are at 170. So they lost only in the years from 2008 half the value in the Serbian dinar. So we should actually insist on the Serbs to adopt the euro, also for fairness reasons, because the devaluation is, of course, a disaster for all the neighbors, but also for them to be locked into the European system. You want to join the EU, but you don't like the euro, you don't want to join NATO, and what else you don't like? Yeah? You don't want to recognize Kosovo, you want to buy weapons from Serbia, from Russia and China, so thank you very much. Yeah? Anyhow, this is my slide for European Serbia. Please scrap the dinar and adopt the euro now, and obviously all the other necessary things, join NATO, recognize Kosovo, and let Bosnia join NATO, and by yourself join NATO. Yes, but first of all, do the dinar. I think this can be expected very easily. It's not controversial. It's just a normal thing to use our currency if you want to join our union. It's a political union with a currency union attached, and it cannot be separated from each other. So here comes Bosnia. That's a very easy case because it's already packed from the start, and I really don't know if anybody has the explanation why the Bosnians did not really do the euro transfer as well, because their currency is the last remaining German mark in Europe, if you want to say it like this, because they have their own bills, but it was pegged to it's called even convertible mark. So the idea was to have the mark, but to not have it completely. They have their own bills, but when you go because it's 1 to 2 to the euro, you can pay with the euro everywhere, because that's basically in the thinking. And anyhow, Bosnia is so connected to the Austrian and to the German economy in many ways, not from the history, but from the last years where so many Bosnians had to flee and had to work in Austria and Germany, but also in Italy and other parts of Europe. So basically the remittances are such an important factor. So it's so logically to do that. And actually it's the same also for Albania. I made the case already. I'm also for federalism, you know that. But for Albania, I say it's a bit behind Montenegro and behind North Macedonia. So if Albania really wants to join the EU in this decade and this mandate until 2022, 2023, then it's important to really adopt the euro. The same for Macedonia, and to build a consensus for that one. And because Macedonia and Albania, they are already in NATO. So basically Montenegro is perfect. They have already the euro, and the two others should have it as well. And then the logical conclusion is that Albania adopts the euro as well. So we have 3 NATO members, 3 euro adopters, and they are then ready for membership in 2022. And not to wait some decades as Mr. Macron wants. And I have here appealed also to the leader of the Albanians in Macedonia, because I want to make sure that when you talk about unity, it's very important to start with the euro. The euro is the tool for unity in Europe, and we can adopt it very much now, and it helps very much all the segments of the society. And of course, you know, to have a common currency is already very good between Albania, between Kosovo, between Montenegro, and also Serbia. So that's really the first concrete step for having the future in the European Union, to be united, but as separate states in NATO, in the Euro, and in the European Union, similar like the Baltic countries. Here I have this talk about the PEC again, when it's very important to see that the Baltic countries have done that one as well, and it worked very well. They are really a historic success of transformation, because from the beginning they worked on a decent philosophy. Very different, you see the Eastern Partnership countries. They have gone all through 3 different major devaluation crises now. You have the crisis of 2008, the big financial crisis. You have then the crisis of 2014 of the Ukraine war, which was hitting Eastern Europe especially. And now again, you have the Corona crisis. Yeah? So many crises, and you see one shock after another, because they never went really like the Baltic countries for the currency peg, but they went for disaster. And I call to Ukraine, repeat the success of Germany when they had in 48 the currency reform. This is the way: first the euro, then NATO, then the EU, and later comes unity as a result of the prosperity differential which a Western integrated country gives compared to Russian-occupied Crimea and Russian-occupied Donbass. And then these regions the people will want to run into Ukraine, into free Ukraine, and then the Russians have to build walls and keep them in, like the Berlin Wall. They will do the same, and then by time the differences will be so bad that all the people will simply run away like they did in the GDR. So that's the way for Ukraine also to adopt the euro and to follow the Western German model on that one. Also the Montenegro model, you know, there are so many models on that. Also the Lithuanian model, whatever model you will. Everybody else has done it more successfully than Ukraine after 2014, because you continued the constant devaluation drive, because that was the policy adopted. And now anyhow, there is this very low interest rate, exchange rate, so it's very good now to lock this in and keep it stable like this, because that's also a competitive advantages for Ukraine, and this will allow you to grow successfully in the coming years. Yeah? So the same is true for Moldova. Anyhow, squeezed between Ukraine and Romania, and with Romanian Eurozone membership, the currency reality will already significantly change. And of course, Georgia is a bit far away, but also Cyprus is a bit far away. Also, Cyprus is partly occupied. Also, Georgia is partly occupied. So please, again, the way is the euro, like in Cyprus, and then NATO. That's obviously an open issue still for Cyprus, but it will come as well. And then the EU and get on and full action. That's basically the whole idea of the Werner Plan 2000. You know, I have made a number of videos on that one, and I'm looking forward for your feedback. I want to connect that, but also with a little bit of economic history for all those who are interested. We have had a number of now this talk and I also want to connect it with the current economic crisis of the corona, because there is this talk that this is the biggest crisis since 29, which is not true, but it's a very big crisis. Yeah? And we have to be smart and we have to be with courage in order to overcome it. And I want to explain a little bit what kind of crises we had in the past, and how we overcome them and what was the consequences if we didn't overcome them. So basically, economic crises handled badly can go very terrible bad, yeah? But handled decently with more unity and good economic governance can also lead to more prosperity afterwards. Yeah? So I want to start in the year 1907. That was the first big crisis of the 20th century, and it was a very big one. It led to a big stock exchange crash, and it has had major economic consequences around the world, because basically the end of credit for Mexico, China, Turkey has led to major revolutions and crises all around the world. Because when the legitimate governments of these countries don't have any credit anymore from the global financial market, that was not so big. There was only London, Paris, Berlin, and New York. So basically this dried up in this crisis, and then you had it all shaking, yeah? From the fall of the Chinese empire to the Mexican Revolution, to the Young Turk Revolution, and so on and so on. All the emerging world was basically in a total shakeup, and that also was very much a contributing factor towards World War I. Then you obviously had World War I, which was a major economic crisis. I have chosen this 14th of January, the so-called hunger riots in Vienna. There was little to eat left, yeah, and people were starving. This was a major economic crisis. Then after World War II, World War I, the Americans withdrew from the world and didn't ratify the Versailles Agreement. That was a big shock for the world, and we were doomed basically from that moment onwards. Yeah. The whole World War I crisis led then into this big financial crisis in Germany, hyperinflation, hunger, and the whole period from 1919 to 23, when the world was Europe was somehow re-established and recovering. That was basically a big economic crisis. But it was then leading to the fact that the Americans have limited the migration access for Europeans on the 26th of May 24, a day which led to shall live in history in infamy, because this was a racist anti-European law. It established quota against poor Europeans, especially Eastern Europeans, and it led to a bubble in the American economy, which burst 5 years later in the Great Depression. Actually, that was just a stock market crash on the 24th of October, 29, but then obviously this was compounded by the protectionist reflexes of the Americans. 1 year later, or half a year later, they adopted this terrible smooth holy protectionist tariffs, which then added to the financial shock came the protectionist shock. And then we had Roosevelt elected, and contrary to popular belief, the beginning was very terrible. He was later the greatest president of America, definitely, with winning World War II, but he started with a currency crisis. And this was basically then a big shock, because there was the effort to somehow get the world organized again economically. And then in this between June and July 33, Roosevelt devalued the dollar and left the gold standard. And, that was basically the road to war. And then this triple shock of the stock market crisis, the protectionist and the currency shock has basically led into complete chaos, yeah, and the breakdown of the global order. You can add, of course, the League of Nations and the Japanese attacking, and it doesn't really exculpate anybody from the terrorist regimes of Japan and Germany for any of their crimes, but the breakdown of the global economic order was very much started, 1, 2, 3. And so there was no order anymore, so everybody went alone. And the most brutals started the war. So basically we have to be very careful out of these consequences, what happened in these 30s. Yeah? So then I have made, because you can, of course, this whole Second World War was a major economic crisis, but I have made the 2nd of May. That's in 41 was the decision by the German Nazi regime to make this big colonial conquest in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and obviously to destroy segments of the population by hunger. It's infamously called the Hunger Plan, and basically that should be symbolizing the whole terror of the economic crisis and the terror of hunger of the World War II. How was basically then that settled? It was settled by Bretton Woods in July 44. Already it was decided to make better global economic governance out of the consequences of the knowledge of everything that went wrong in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And so then came this Bretton Woods, and that's basically the fundament on which we stand still today. How terrible it was in Europe at the moment, 2 years afterwards, still at the 15th of July, there was the big currency crisis, basically the British Empire fiscally breaking down. And of course, Central Europe, Germany, Austria, still people dying of hunger. And it was a big disaster. The Americans, I think, understood with the breakdown of the currency of the pound of the Brits, when they had to take the empire, they left India. They had to give the Greek Civil War to the Americans, and they were out of business basically. And Germany, Western Germany, was in a big disaster still from the World War, and Austria as well. France had this big political crisis on the 5th of May, and so there was basically, this was the moment when the Americans said, okay guys, we cannot withdraw and leave them alone again. Bretton Woods alone will not make it. We need really to focus on Europe and build up all these institutions. And then came the year 49 with the Marshall Plan, with the OECD, with the Council of Europe, with all this, with NATO obviously, and all this firm American commitment to Western European security and prosperity, fiscal reconciliation and currency building, and this was really very important. And I have also then to see where I have the right point. I will check that. Then was the currency shock here. I will go 1 second. Bear with me if you are patient. I will show you this beautiful slide, which I have not copied into my main presentation. If you bear with me, it's worth to be, because I would like to add it basically here, because how it really happened, and when we talk about currency, we cannot leave it out. This was the 48, the German mark introduction. Again, I repeat, here was the hunger crisis with the British pound failing in 47. Then was the Soviets printing a lot of occupation marks to finance, to transfer basically the costs of the occupation of Eastern Germany towards the Western Allies and the Western German, because that's what you do when you have two people printing money. The ones are reasonable and the others are not, and they basically, that's not possible. So you have the Western Germans and backed by the Americans, basically, thank you USA. It was the USA occupation authorities who decided to take the responsibility, print a new currency and detach it from the Eastern Germans and the Soviets. And then, obviously, that led to a major confrontation, because the Soviets were that angry, because they have lost this kind of printing machine and the access to the Western German purse and to the Allied subsidies. And so that was the moment, 20th of June, where the Berlin crisis started. but also it was the moment where the Cold War was won, because the whole fundament, there was a firm fundament for the economic miracle of Western Germany, and then the NATO accession of Western Germany, and the whole resources of Western Germany were available for the Western world. And then suddenly, suddenly 40 years it took, to win the Cold War, because this economic rivalry or kind of long-term confrontation, it takes a long time. You don't win this competition for prosperity differential in 2 years. You win wars maybe, or lose wars in 2 years, but it took 40 years, but it worked very well. This was basically the moment where the Cold War was really won, the fundamental decision, and to have the German mark introduced. And that was in 48, and then came the confrontation, then came the big three institutions, OECD, Council of Europe, and then NATO. And then obviously later came the EU in the 50s, the start of the coal and steel community. And I have made a separate presentation about the old foundation history of the European Union. I will not repeat that here because I'm focusing on the currency, because between this one, 49, and 71, we had relatively good years because the reconstruction of Western Europe worked, the institutions were there, Western Germany was stable, the currency system worked, and so we had this 50s and 60s, despite all the big political and strategic crises. There were so many. I made one on the NATO presentation there. But economically, it was the big, what the French called the Trente Glorieuses, the 30 good years. But it was this reconstruction of Western Europe, which, based on these American-led institutions, worked very well. And then came the moment with the Vietnam War and everything, and then there came the end of Bretton Woods in that sense. Still, Bretton Woods the idea is still there, but of course the currency system with the Nixon shock, and Nixon basically leaving the gold standard again and thinking to go alone. And this was a very terrible decision. Not that we need the gold standard again. I'm not one of them. No. I think we need this kind of fiat currencies. But what we really need is a decent, coordinated Western currency policy, like we have now with the Central Bank of Europe and with the Central Bank of the US. This is what we didn't have in the 71. And then basically the whole decoupling of the global price indexes has led to many terrible consequences. I will talk in a moment about it. But this was really Nixon himself deciding in the 15th of August to scrap that easy way to somehow print himself out of these tasks which he had in Vietnam and everywhere. And then, of course, the world reacted, and it came to the global oil shock. Obviously, that's connected with a lot of Middle East policies, but it was also that the Arab world suddenly saw the Americans are getting now the oil cheaper. And when you see there's this wonderful graph to connect the oil and the dollar price, and then after some years, basically it was a big shock, obviously, these oil prices, the first one and the second one, but it has equilibrated again later, because it was totally unfair what the Americans did in 71. And then it was leading also to this one. Of course, it was part of the Yom Kippur War and the whole crisis we had in October 73 and the terrible 70s, and it led to then, just let me sure if I'm in the right, no, I have to make a thought. This is the right way to put it, because obviously then the terrible 70s economically, it was really the most terrible decade. Also in the Cold War, I made the presentation about the terrible 70s, but then you had the Nixon shock. 73, you had the first oil shock, and 79, with the Iran crisis, you had the third big economic shock. And everybody who remembers, these were really the times where the people we had to ration gas in America and in Europe. My parents, I will never forget it. They had the even numbers could go on one day, and the next day you couldn't drive the car, and so on and so on. It was really rationing. It was quite terrible. And it was high inflation, high interest rates. It was a complete mess. And obviously the strategic shocks, the loss of Iran, the loss of over 20 countries globally in the 70s, but the big three economic shocks, they were obviously a big crisis. Then came certain recovery, and we somehow have managed and this is also, no, I have to put it in this, okay, let's put it here inside, yeah, because it's time-wise correct, yeah. Then obviously was the UK joining the EU, but then it was immediately followed by a big currency crisis in when the IMF had to bail out Britain. Often it's forgotten, but you know the UK was by far not in a good shape as the Western Europeans, because it was not in the EU, it was not so stabilized, it didn't reform so, and while the Germans and the Western Europeans, mainly the Germans and the French and the Benelux, had a really very good reconstruction period until 75. It was then the big currency crisis because the UK was not going at all very well these 30 years, and the UK had basically stabilized only then with Thatcher inside the European internal market. But let's not forget this second sterling shock, I call it, because the first one was in 47, the second one was in 76, and then came obviously in 92 the third one. So here the oil shock, the second one, the Iran crisis. Then came the better years. This was again, you know, the great heroes of the victory of Cold War, Thatcher, Kohl, and Reagan. And then they were basically on the 22nd of September. Then came the dollar shock because again the Americans decided to devaluate the dollar. And this is the Plaza Agreements I'm talking here about, yeah. And it was obviously badly managed, yeah. So basically what you always do, you know, when the Americans, you have to work very carefully as well on the currency because they have this big power in the currency and what we need. And therefore it's very important to have a stable currency system between the euro and the dollar, not to compete on kind of megalomania, but to have global currency stability between the main actors, yeah. And also concerning the oil price, yeah, and how it was managed in the Plaza Accords was definitely a big economic crisis. And then, obviously, nevertheless, we managed. We were lucky. The Soviet Union was breaking down economically, mainly because of Afghanistan, because of, and also that has maybe an effect, an important one. We shouldn't forget the whole system of the oil prices. Then, in the second part of the 80s, this played a major part with the fall of the Soviet Union, because from 86. I should actually make another slide on that one, because actually one of the reasons for winning the Cold War was obviously the major drop in energy prices from 85 and 86. Yeah, I have basically, yeah, this is where I have it here, and it was exactly here when you see. And this year, Saudi abandons a swing producer role, oil price, and the massive drop to $20. This was basically where this wonderful windfall profits of 73 to 86 were evaporating for the Soviets. And that was very much leading to this crisis, that's true, but also then to the end of the Cold War because the Soviets were out of money. So then we could do this post-Cold War victory peace conference. The Cold War very much was about Europe, so there was no kind of real peace conference. It was not called like this, but I want to explain it like that because here the decisions for the Euro and for EU enlargement were made. So that's why also I call it 0.1, because we need a new one now in the second Cold War, which we are. So on the 16th of September, let's not forget, this was the next major currency shock. It was 92. It was the breakdown of the European currency system and the third sterling crisis, but also the lira crisis. Yeah? It was not only the UK, but also the lira, and it was quite dramatic. Yeah? And it was for all who were alive then, it was very dramatic. Suddenly the lira It was very hard for the Austrian economy, for the German. It was a breakdown of the system, and it was the one big shock, which basically some in the UK said the German unification cost. It was also a question of British leadership and commitment towards the European Union, and so on and so on. Many crises, also speculation maybe, but it was the defining shock which has then put the currency union really on track, because then it was clear for the Europeans that we need a unified currency, we need the euro. And of course, it was already decided, but this shock showed it to everybody that it's so necessary. We had then another, some may call it a regional crisis, but I call this 98, it was also a global shock. It was the growth crisis of the Asian tigers, it was the breakdown of the Russian ruble, and it was the Argentinian crisis. The 1 or 2 years together, all the periphery breaking down, and it was a big shock after this post-Cold War dividend growth phase. There was basically not enough stability in the currency system. And we can be quite happy that we had this wonderful courage to do the currency union in 1999, because it was really at the right moment when we could stabilize the European currency system. And with it, we had a big impact also globally on more stable situation, because we took a lot of risk out of the global currency system. Then exactly at that moment was already, the breakdown of the .com bubble. So the whole hubris of the 90s was going to evaporate just 3 months after the introduction of the euro. And we were very lucky that we had already this common currency. Then came the next shock with September 11. I put the 17th for the economic, because I put in the NATO the 9/11, but the 17th September was basically the day when the trading system and the global financial market opened again. And this should show the resilience, and to celebrate it. But nevertheless, there's a resilience. The thing is that it was a big shock, and we can be very happy that we had the euro already, because it would have been devastating effect on the European currency system if not the euro, and we somehow managed to stabilize the system. And together with the Americans, in a coordination, the central bank and the federal bank, obviously with the leadership of the Fed and Alan Greenspan, it was possible to weather the storm and to have 8 good years. Some call it irrational exuberance, but it was great growth years for the global economy. And we managed very well until the shock of 2008. Obviously, that's very famous and well documented. And then came the next shock in 2014 with the Russians trying to change the global system economically, politically, and with the war in Ukraine, but also with Syria, the migration crisis, Brexit, interventions. Let's start here. The 18th of March I've chosen to memorize the day when the Russians changed the global world order. At least they tried. And it was a major shock felt in the whole of Eastern Europe. We were a little bit, in the Eurozone. Luckily, again, we had the third major crisis. We were able, with all the negative effects, maybe I should also mention, then the debt crisis in Greece, but it was, and in Southern Europe, but we managed. And what I want to show is with all these things, we were able, because of the euro, to manage. Obviously, it was expensive. Obviously, it was complicated, and shock after shock we had, but we were able to manage all these shocks because of our common unified currency and our common united political will to keep it. So then we had, now we have this corona crisis, and again the question is what we will do, how we will organize growth in the next years, how to organize the 2020s, the recovery. Some say it's the worst crisis, but with my presentation I wanted to show we have exactly the 17th, for all in all I think it's the 20th crisis in 120 years since 1907. And it's very important to understand that we have the tools, we have the mechanisms, we have the instrument in place. We just need to use them, and we have to include more countries into that. That's basically the main thesis of my presentation here. We are also, without the UK, we are still allied. We have in NATO, we have EU 27 states. we have 448 million. That's quite a lot. Obviously, we're not as big as Southeast Asia with Japan or with China, but we are much bigger than Russia. We are bigger than the US. We have decent GDP of 18 trillion. Together, the West United still produces more than 60% of all the GDP. What we need is to provide these opportunities for the Eastern Europeans. This is very important. That is why we need the Werner Plan now. We need to include the Eastern Europeans. We need to make sure that this currency crisis, which might come, is avoided because we have unified the Euro system. We have ensured that Poland and the others are joining. We have made sure that the Ukraine and Georgia and all the other countries are inside. We have made sure that we are less dependent from Russia by cutting this Nord Stream 2, and we have ensured that we have more unity. We already managed quite well with this big package of 4.2 trillion, all in all the European member states and the EU, with this big unique recovery plan. That was very good. Obviously, we need to cut taxes now, very important. We need to focus on growth and not the climate. We need to make sure that we have the money well spent on infrastructure. We need really to be competitive and focus on that one. Yeah? That's very important, and that will be the basis for a durable recovery. And this will also avoid what we have seen in the last decade. We have fallen back a little bit towards the US in GDP prosperity. Obviously, we're taking a lot of people into the European Union. Obviously, the Americans were quite open as well. So it's not the case. We have been not flexible enough. We didn't cut taxes. We have not really opened the European system enough towards world trade and also to migration. And we need really to tackle that. Yeah? We need to tackle that. Yeah? This is very important, yeah? And to catch up with the Americans. And how to do that? It's lower taxes, more openness, and more unity. In this presentation, I have talked very much about the more unity, about the euro, but you can follow all the other presentations about lower taxation, more openness, more unity. That's really very important because we want to be as rich as the North Americans. We don't want to fall behind. We need to be more open as well. We need also to ensure, and that's now for the recovery. You see how the Peterson Institute estimates the recovery now in the 2020s. The UK will fall behind. The EU might do quite good, but needs until 2021 to recover to 98% of 2019. So it's not perfect. The Chinese are doing much better. Also, the Americans will be already at next year at 100, and they will again grow much faster. So we really have to ensure that we repeat what we have done in the first years of you see where we really recovered from 2000 to 2010. That was the year of the decade of the enlargement with Poland and the 10 countries in. That was really good. We need Ukraine into the European Union and the internal market. We need the Balkans in the internal market. This is very important. And we need, of course, a more flexible economy. We need to solve this $12 trillion question, where I say we are really behind, and we have to catch up to repeat the next 30 good years of globalization since the victory in the Cold War. We have to come up with a very good, stable framework to make that possible, and we have to enlarge the Euro and the European Union. We have to enlarge and repeat the Adenauer plan of 48 with the West integration and with the plan ahead towards NATO, and that's the global role of the euro, not to be megalomaniac and to think we can compete with the dollar, but to make sure that the euro is the working currency everywhere in the countries which join the European Union in the future. And that's my appeal. Please adopt the euro. Please join the Eurozone. Thanks a lot. Euro 34.